Well, a good almost afternoon to everyone. I have been meeting with Ted Kuczinski every Wednesday for a few hours in the afternoon for the last 3 weeks, and he's told me his story. His vocabulary gets away from him nowadays, as many of us do, and he's asked me to tell his story, but he'll take your questions at the end. So, this is your life, Ted Kuczinski. You were born in March 1934, March 3rd, which means that in 33 days from now, you'll be 89. You came into this world in Port Washington on Long Island, on a peninsula between Manhasset Bay and Hempstead Harbor called Cow Neck Peninsula. It's only 20 kilometers from here as the crow flies, but for humans driving, it'll take you about an hour if the traffic isn't too bad. Cow Neck Peninsula is, by the way, famous for historic communities and sand mines. The sand went into concrete, and according to, I looked this up, the Cow Neck Peninsula Historical Society, by some calculations, 90% of the concrete that built the sidewalks, skyscrapers, and subway tunnels and building foundations of New York City came from Port Washington. More than 100 million tons of sand was shipped to Manhattan. The foundations of New York City, in other words, came from the sand mines of Port Washington, which seemed to me to be worth mentioning, because a foundation of this congregation also came from Port Washington. Ted, you came into this world on Henderson Avenue in the days when babies were born at home, not in a hospital. Your father, Peter Kuczinski, arrived in the U.S. He was 18 or 19 years old when he got here, an immigrant from Western Poland. Your mother, Emily Rawa, about the same age, arrived in the U.S. about the same time from near Warsaw. Peter and Emily had both come from a Poland where Russia was in charge. And under the Russian system, Poles could only go to school through 3rd grade. Only one child from each family could be sent to the U.S. The Kuczinskis sent Peter, and the Rawas sent Emily and Peter met. And they married in Bayside in the early 1920s. You, Ted, were their 4th and youngest child. Your oldest sibling was your sister Frances, born 1924, 10 years older than you. She became a telephone operator, migrated up to an officer in the phone company with stock options in AT&T, so she's fairly well off. Then there was your brother Edward, born a year later in 1925. Edward was to be paralyzed with polio at age 10 or 11 when you were too young to remember him being any other way. And third was your brother Henry, born 1929, 5 years older than you. And then you. You came into the world in the middle of the Great Depression, 1934. There on Henderson Avenue, most of your neighbors were either Polish or Italian immigrants. You remember that most of them worked as either cooks or house cleaners. And beyond Henderson Avenue, beyond that immigrant enclave, what was going on in the wider world that you were born into? Well, maybe you don't even remember this yourself, but the year you were born, Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed and killed by police, as were John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson. Hitler became Fuhrer. It was a good year in some ways. Carl Sagan and Leonard Cohen were born that year. $1 then would get you what it takes more than $20 to get today. You could buy a Ford V8 for $515, which would be over $11,000 in today's money, but is still cheap for a new car. You went to kindergarten at Sands Point, bicycled a half mile or so to what is now John J. Daly Elementary School, where your classmates were predominantly of either Polish or Italian extraction. Times were pretty skimpy for an immigrant family during the Depression, but you had chickens in the backyard and you had a garden, and that helped the Kuczinskis get through it. The house was heated with coal and wood, and the family, you've told me, mainly lived in the kitchen. And when you needed more chickens, you incubated eggs near the stove. Your father, Peter, worked for the Knickerbocker Ice Company, delivering ice in Port Washington, because everybody needed a block of ice once or twice a week. There were 2 amphibious airplanes that flew to Europe in those days, taking off and landing in the water of Connecticut Sound near Port Washington. One plane called the Yankee Clipper, the other the China Clipper. You remember your father taking you to see the interior of those planes. After you finished kindergarten, your family moved to Delaware Avenue, about a mile closer to the center of Port Washington. Even so, you remember it as a wooded area with a stream flowing through. And at the bottom of the hill was St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church, about a 7-minute walk away, where your family went every Sunday. The church gave your life a structure. You liked the ceremony and the pomp. It was like opera, you said. Costumes, sets, plus incense, the works. Church taught you as a child that even adults have to follow rules. And it taught you to help people, to care for others. For grades 1 through 6, you went to Main Street School. And in 2nd grade, you remember a classmate. Her name was Ann Gelder, breaking down as she told the class about the Pearl Harbor attack. Her father was stationed there. In 7th through 9th grade, you attended the junior high school on Main Street. It was at least 2 miles away, and you usually walked, lugging with you the trumpet or cornets, which you played in your junior high school band. You were already working in junior high to get some spending money. You were a pin boy at the bowling alley and a golf caddy, a job you held into high school. By the time you were in senior high school, the family had moved again, though only a few blocks, this time to South Bales Avenue in Port Washington. You remember that there was a barn in the back and that the high school was near your new home. You were playing in the school band and orchestra, and every Memorial Day, the high school band marched from the main cemetery across the street from the high school, a couple miles down to the docks. In high school, in addition to the usual required courses, you were taking music, art, and the industrial arts, such as woodworking, metalworking, and printing. You were a junior in high school when the tragedy of your father's death occurred. Your father was often working on houses. He was up on a ladder on a house painting job when the wooden rung of the ladder broke, and his fall broke his pelvis. He was taken to the hospital, and you saw him there. You remember a black crow came to the windowsill, and that night, your father threw a blood clot and died. You didn't know until you were at school the next morning and were called into the principal's office. Your father died, the principal said bluntly. When you got home, your mom was screaming. She grabbed you, and you wanted to be grabbed. An open coffin for 3 days and 3 nights, and as you saw your father lying there, you had a strong sense that that's not him. In school, there was a teacher who entrusted you with the task of printing the weekly school bulletin. It was a page or two, and it was printed on a printing press. So on Sundays, you'd be down at the printers arranging each letter upside down and backwards on a composing stick, and then operating the old-fashioned printing press. You graduated high school, class of 1952 from Port Washington High School. The 1952 yearbook describes you as good-looking and witty, an active member of the band, orchestra, and choir, a top-notch trumpet player, hoped to go on to trade school. But you weren't really thinking very seriously about trade school, were you? When the yearbook people came around, you had to tell them something, so that's what you said. Your work printing the school bulletin had generated a job offer from Doubleday Printing, which you could have taken up upon graduation, But you didn't go that route either. You weren't particularly thinking of college because in those days, in your circles, college was for girls. Real men didn't go to college. But then there was that teacher, the same one who gave you the printing assignment, said to you, look, do me a favor, a college entrance exam is being administered in Mineola, 7 or 8 miles away. Go take the entrance exam. So you went down to Mineola, took the exam, and then forgot about it. Until a few weeks later, a letter arrived saying that you'd been accepted into the State University of New York Teachers College at Oswego, now called SUNY Oswego, up on the banks of Lake Ontario, 40 miles north of Syracuse, 75 miles east of Rochester. So you went. Doors opened, and you walked through. When you went off to college, your mother moved about 10 miles south to New Hyde Park. You gained a lot in Oswego, and you lost a kidney. After your father died, you started having pain in the left side. The doctors would say, does the pain come and go? And you would say, yes. And they'd say, well, then it can't be serious. But in Oswego, it got so bad that you walked into a hospital and told them you were in such pain that you were going to get a shotgun and shoot off your left side. So they took you in right away. They removed your kidney. Without general anesthetic at first, you could hear the doctor say, oh my God, it's 5 times the size it should be. When you came to after the surgery, a crucifix and 2 candles were on the stand next to the bed. You were somewhat startled to realize that a priest must have been there giving you last rites. Your professors all came and visited and encouraged you to take it easy, not to worry about classes. You went home to New Hyde Park to recover, and you were home for about a month and then back to classes in Oswego. You joined the Delta Kappa fraternity. Primarily, you said, because by helping out in the frat house, you could live there free. The fact that you like people and they like you would also have been a factor in making fraternity living attractive. In fact, your classmates elected you to the honor of Oswego Snow King.
They feel sorry for me.
You worked throughout the college years to help pay for the costs, and you majored in industrial arts education, earning the Bachelor of Science in 1956. And so you were set to be a high school shop teacher. And your first job after college was back on Long Island, teaching woodworking at West Babylon High School, about 30 miles southeast of your old hometown of Port Washington. You had that job for 2 years, and then joined a program to teach in Germany at a school for dependents of American military stationed there. It was 1958, and you were sent to Baumholter, Germany, where to this day the U.S. Army base there hosts the largest amount of U.S. forces outside the United States. And you taught woodworking. Among the other faculty at this American school in Germany was a certain cute art teacher named Claire. And she was also of Polish heritage. All the teachers held the rank of captain. You remember that for Americans in any way attached to the base as you were, if you had a car, it came with sealed orders in case of alarm. And though the orders were sealed, you were given to understand the gist of what was in them. Head for France and pick up people along the way that are walking. You and Claire started dating, including going together to a fencing class every Wednesday at the local hockey club. You remember practicing there by trying to hit a bottle cap suspended by a string from the ceiling. When the year ended, and you and Claire were slated to fly back to the U.S., you discovered that Claire had been put on a different flight. Well, you would have none of that. You whipped out your captain's ID and got Claire moved to the flight you were on. It's a long flight from Germany across the Atlantic back to New York, but it does not have to be a lonely one. Back in the U.S., it's now 1959. You returned to teaching industrial arts at West Babylon High School for a 3rd year. During that year, you and Claire married. 1960, January 23rd, a civil ceremony at City Hall in Manhattan. Your mom, though, wanted a Catholic wedding, so a couple months later, you and Claire had a Catholic wedding, 1960, March 13th. It's a good idea to have 2 anniversaries a year. And then, that fall of 1960, you started at Teachers College, Columbia, studying to get a master's in administration and guidance counseling, which you probably received a year later. During that year, you did your internship at Mount Vernon High School. And as you almost always do, Ted, you impressed the people there. They offered you the job of guidance counselor. For 3 years, you were the guidance counselor, and then you became that school's principal for 3 more years. During those years, daughter Nadja was born, 1964, September. Son Stefan followed in 1966, June. You were living in New Rochelle for a couple of those years, and then in 1968, you bought the house you live in to this day on Green Ridge Avenue, White Plains. You remember that at some point during those years, the Mount Vernon superintendent asked you, Ted, did you ever think of being a priest? Something about you suggested a kindly spiritual manner, but priesthood was not your calling. In fact, it was about that time that you and Claire started coming here to the Community Unitarian Church, where no one will ever ask you to become a priest. You and Claire had tried the Ethical Culture Society before that, and Claire had been a Unitarian back in Dayton, Ohio, so why not give Unitarian Universalism a try here? Peter Sampson was the minister here way back then. In time, you served on the CUUC board and were its chair. But it was in this congregation's choir that you were most in your element and were the most fulfilled. From the trumpet you played in your middle school band through about 50 years in the CUC and then CUUC choir, music has been so important for you. Among your CUC contributions, you especially fondly recall a trip with our youth group to Bear Mountain. There was hiking and canoeing, and at one point on that trip, you and the youth hiked to the top of a hill, where you all lay down on your backs looking up at the sky. And the kids started reciting poetry or sharing something that moved them. It was a very memorable moment. From 1969 to 73, you were the principal at Pelham. You remember that during the Pelham time, you were sent to England to observe the open classroom approach that they had there. And then a professor from Columbia called you, said, Ted, I need your help. Do me a favor. Go interview for the principal's job in Great Neck on Long Island. So you went. There was a back to basics movement going through the schools, but you tended to be sympathetic to the open classroom approach you'd seen in England. The Great Neck folks didn't mind. They liked you. They offered you the position. And you turned it down because you didn't want to move from White Plains and you didn't want the long commute. They excused you from the room to talk among themselves, and they kept coming back with higher and higher salary offers until you said yes. And so, from 1973 to 1990, you had 17 years as the principal of Elizabeth M. Baker Elementary School in Great Neck, New York. It's about a 40-minute drive from your house if the traffic isn't bad. And you drove a VW camper during those years, always arriving at school very early, as principals sometimes do, and you did more than most. Later on some days, you'd go to Great Neck by boat across the Sound, and the school custodian would meet you at the dock to take you on to the school. People there, of course, liked you. Some of the Baker teachers still give you a call from time to time, although you've been retired now for more than 30 years. One of the things you let your faculty know was that you didn't want kids sent to the principal's office for disciplinary reasons. You said that if necessary, you would come and talk to a disruptive child, but that it would be in a setting other than your office. Instead, you made a trip to the principal's office into an honor, When a child, usually a first grader, would break the reading code and could read, then they would go to the principal's office, to your office, Ted, and display their newfound skill, proudly reading aloud to the principal for a few minutes. You created a Student and Principal Advisory Club, the SPAC, the SPAC. It was a K through 6 school, and only 6th graders and you were on the SPAC, but different 6th graders were assigned to be in touch with and represent the other grades. The SPAC talked through whatever issues might be coming up and were on their minds. The SPAC told you that some kids would rather read a book than have recess or gym. So you allowed them some days to come to the auditorium instead to hang out with the principal, and you would read to them. Reader's Theater with Principal Kuczinski. Grades 3, 4, and 5 on Mondays at 12:05 and grades 1 and 2 on Thursdays at 1:10. You read books that your teachers would recommend. One day, you found a big bird in the school dumpster, a replica of the Sesame Street character. You rescued it and you put it in the school lobby with a sign that said, "I'm lost, please help me." And you had a box next to Big Bird for students to write advice. Now they had a reason for writing because they wanted to help Big Bird. That was up for about a month. You did require your teachers to sign in every morning upon arrival. There was some objection on the grounds that it seemed a bit paternalistic, but you cared about your people and you needed to know if something had prevented them from showing up one day. And one day, indeed, one of your teachers who had never been late didn't show up on the sign-in. So you called to see what was going on. And it turned out that that teacher's husband committed suicide with automobile exhaust that leaked into the house and nearly also killed the teacher. Because of your call, Ted, you were able to hear that she was barely able to be coherent and send an ambulance that may well have saved her life. The school is a family, you told me. And like any family, there are ups and downs. There are births, and there are deaths. After retiring from Baker Elementary, you were an interim principal for 7 more years. It was a different school every year, which you characterized as a wonderful challenge. There was one school, Cottle School, where you had a 2-year interim, and they sent you to Japan for a couple of weeks to observe the schools there. And through the years, you and Claire and the kids traveled widely. That VW camper took you to Vancouver one time, and to Mexico another time. There were trips to Venice, Yugoslavia, England, Wales, and Scotland. In London, you rented a car and told the kids, "Watch that I stay to the left." Especially at a corner or a roundabout, it's okay to yell at me. You stayed at a B&B once that was an actual castle. Travel for you was a great way to explore and meet people. You traveled with a UU group, to Egypt, Jordan, Turkey. On your first trip to Poland, you looked in a phone book to see if there were any other Kuczynskis. It was like half the phone book were Kuczynskis, you said. In the mid-1970s, Claire and the kids started going to Star Island for a week or so every summer. The Unitarian Center there has conferences and programmings amid the beautiful island setting off of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And after your retirement in 1990, you started joining them there. It's a great place. Check it out for your summer plans. In the mid-1990s, you were in a music video by the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Christmas Eve in Sarajevo. You'll go to YouTube and Google Christmas Eve Sarajevo, you can find it, and you'll see Ted playing the role of the orchestra conductor. Somebody called and said, "Could you do this?" Doors opened, and you walked through. You said yes. A few years back, this congregation needed someone to coordinate the kitchen renovation, and you said yes. The kitchen renovation went on for about 3 years. You were the one talking with all the contractors. The background in industrial arts came in handy. And you started collecting posters in 1990 during a trip to Poland. You've got about 800 or so posters now, posters for jazz performances, Judaica, diaspora, movies, theater, opera, a number of solidarity posters, all carefully protected in drawers. People got to know you as a poster collector and would contact you, and they had some. In 1999, the Polish-American World named you its Citizen of the Year. You've been on the board of the Human Development Services of Westchester. In fact, you're still serving on that board. You were a Democratic district leader for decades and belonged to 2 Polish halls, including the one in Port Washington. Your kids are all long grown. Daughter Nadja has 2 boys of her own, 18 and 16. And son Stefan has 2 girls, 15 and 13. And this is your life, Ted Kuczinski. Open it up for your questions. I have a few of my own for what we call the lightning round. Question 1, what is your favorite place on the planet?
Home.
What are you proudest of?
Let me just respond to that another minute. With all, as I grew and I explored and so on and so forth, we saw a lot of great things that would make you want to say, this is where I want to be, or whatever. And you know what? It didn't beat us being together in our home, and that's the real one.
And what are you proudest of?
I grew up in an atmosphere that said, you don't blow your own horn. If you're good, people will know it. And so now you have to tell me I have to tell you what I'm proud of. I'm proud that I had the opportunity to travel. And the best thing in the world was working with kids. And I started at high school as a counselor, and I found out that it was already too late to work with those kids. That they already had their feeling about authority, about learning, about books and homework. So I slowly worked my way down to elementary, where it's really, I think we have a kindergarten teacher here. Raise your hand. I found out that the most important educators in the world in the education system are the kindergartners ones. Because they truly are not teaching first grade. They're truly teaching 15 or 20 kids in their classes, each differently. Who had the main way of learning? Visual, oral, or tactile? And this way, none of the kids felt left out when some reader got up on the stand and made a show.
Oops. What's the biggest surprise of your life?
Not many surprises that are good, but Dad dying was a big bolt to me. Let me just correct the story a little bit. He worked as Iceman, then he worked in the airplane. What's the big airplane?
Boeing?
Out on Grumman Airfield, yeah. And so he was always busy. But home time for Mom and Dad were working on the house, helping us. So that's when he was home for the weekend to borrow his neighbor's ladder. He was a painter. He left it near the house outside. And if you know anything about wood and water and whatever, so the steps that were put in the side became deteriorated, and Dad let go, and Dad fell down. And the neighbors, wanting to do well, picked him up and brought him in the house, which was the wrong thing to do. Now we know that if someone falls, you don't move them. And I went to visit him at Mineola Hospital, and was sitting by the window, and I noticed the bird on the windowsill, and he said that the person in the next bed is gone. They're waiting for a room to take him out. He said the bird was there to take him out, and he said probably this one's here to take someone else out. And that happened. It just wiped me out, you know, because I don't want to believe in stuff like that. But on the other hand, at that time, we didn't use funeral homes. Your relatives who died were laid out in your living room. Yeah. And I would sit on the stairs, and my teachers would come. It would be beautiful. The women would say the rosary 3 days and 3 nights, and we were never home without adults being there with us. And I would look at him in the coffin, and I'd say, you know, that's not him. That's the car that drove him around. That's the shell. And there's no expression, and so on. Let me really think about his soul and what he was there, kind of thing. So that was my surprise.
Can you tell us one good thing about aging?
Slowing things down is the biggest pain in the neck for me, but it's the best thing for me, because as you heard of what I did with my life, I was busy for a lot of that time. And slow down and smell the roses kind of thing is something I didn't do often enough while I was working. And I read Thich Nhat Hanh, I may be pronouncing it wrong, who tells you how to meditate. And working in Great Neck, Friday night, crossing the Throgs Neck Bridge is like walking home in terms of the speed that they're going. But Thich Nhat Hanh says, you can, if you're doing something and it's not working, look a little further. And what I did, I looked at the boats, I looked at the horizon, the clouds, and so on, and then all of my anxiety went downhill, so I used that a lot. But also, being around people, and especially kids, I miss. And that's a life giver for me. And so I'm learning how to do it. My wife can fall asleep wherever she is in the house when she's tired. And I think, no, that's being lazy. You can't, when we grew up, taking a nap. You're not supposed to take a nap. There's so much to do, you know. And finally, I'm learning how to do that, and it works. Of course, look at how beautiful she is.
Last one from me, probably a short answer. Who is your favorite composer?
Ja muszę mówić po polsku czy po angielsku?
Everybody get that?
No.
Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, póki my żyjemy. Jeszcze wódka nie skwaśnała, póki my pijemy. This is the bad way Polish people did for their national anthem. And the second verse is, the vodka will never go bad as long as we're drinking it. So.
So Ted, you'll take a few questions from the audience?
Yes.
All right, who has a question? Gary.
Hey Ted.
Hi.
So just listening to your amazing life story,
Yeah.
I think about not just the thousands of people's lives that you touched through your career, but then the generations that follow, because your influence filters down, and it's really breathtaking to think about. So congratulations on a life well lived. As a fellow musician, I have this is not an easy question, but what does music mean to you? Why is it such an integral part of your life?
For me, from early times, I always loved music. But as I got older, I realized how deep it was in making me feel well and whole. And it's a prayer. It reaches my soul. And that's where it should be. And thank goodness for Lisa, and thank goodness for CUUC and having a choir, which is so great. You might have heard me singing through my mask over here as they sang. But you know, I wasn't an athlete because of my size and weight. But thank goodness I sang and I played my trumpet and so on and so forth. And it made me whole. And the other thing, like when you sing in a choir and you sing in play in an orchestra, I had a teacher who knew exactly what he should do, what in terms of rewarding different people in the choir or in the orchestra. If there was, I was fourth trumpet, working my way up to first trumpet, and what he had us do is go behind the curtain, play something, and he'd have the band or the orchestra or the choir vote. So they didn't know who was playing which, and so on. Little things like that stuck with me. It's very, very much being aware of what it can do to kids when they're chosen because of what they look like or where they come from, not really what the sound was that they made behind that curtain.
This has been a love story. A love story, your wife, your family, to children, all children, to us, to just what you stand for, what your spirit is doing. And I cannot thank you enough for sharing that with us today. I appreciate it so much.
Amen.
Question. Okay. And it's not going to be about music because we're both musicians who have just maintained that. How do you feel, and I know you were principal in White Plains, ran into you there, and I know you from 1960s, we were members here. How do you feel about education in general today?
There should be a law against having more than 15 kids in a classroom at any one time. Teachers need to be reminded that saying something, the younger they are, the more it sticks. That I have people coming back from school and saying, you know, Mrs. So-and-so said this to me when I was in kindergarten, or when I was in first grade, and it made it change. I went to college because a teacher wanted me to do him a favor. That's the way he asked me. He knew I had a job with Double A, with printing. And he said, no, there's not money at home. And he said, do me a favor, go to Mineola and take that test. And I forgot about it. Then once we took it, we found a way with money, and I worked. And it said to me that saying things to kids, you're in a wonderful position as a teacher to give some advice, or to give I hate it when I miss a word. When you're showing them that you feel that they're doing very well, give them a compliment. Trying to
Praise.
Yeah, praise. It works. The earlier you can do it, and give it out free, because it'll come back to you.
Comments, Scott?
So Ted, I think you know my dad is Polish, also from Poland, and you remind me a lot of my dad, and I'm going to tell you why. Because whenever my dad had a cold, he would go into the drawer in the office and pull out the vodka. Okay? So I think of you when I think of that story, and he used to have a sip of vodka, which we've had together, me and you. And also, I also wanted to thank you for all your things that you've done here, maintenance-wise. And I just wanted to remind you that the boiler needs some help today. So if you could take a look at that. So thank you also. I don't have a question, but it was just great interacting with you because of that Polish connection.
Thank you.
Ted, I was wondering, how did World War II impact you? What are some things that stick on your mind? Because obviously you were living during that time.
Say it again?
World War II.
No, get the mic. Yeah.
Comment.
I knew, I knew something was going on, but I was too young. I really didn't know what it was about. I know it was a bad thing, and so on and so forth. And, the Nazis were this and that and the other thing. It never really, at my age, I didn't really have any impact on it. We were home, the house was good, it was heated, we had food. I was feeling very good. And when your sister is 10 years older, it's like having a second mother. So I was lucky there. And my brothers would say, "Oh, you're the youngest, so you get all the breaks. We had to learn how to do all that."
Ted, when you said that college was considered to be something for girls and not boys, could you go further with that? Because I don't quite understand.
this was the football field, this was the football team, and all the guys, I thought, unfortunately, they're from families that they cannot go to college. So one of the ways the boys would respond to that is, oh, that's for girls. We have to do real work, muscles, and dirty, and work to 10 hours a day or whatever. And it was sort of a peripheral thing that I didn't listen to.
All right. It's because you're friends.
Ted, it's been such a privilege to sit beside you in the choir. That part of you that learned the cornet and the trumpet never missed. And we miss you. And you know Lisa has said there's an open slot sitting right beside me because she knows how much I need you. Thank you for the humble witness that you've made about how to be in life and to care, particularly about children. Thank you for I'm just sitting here in awe and grateful for all that you are, have been, and have been for this church. Thank you. Congregation, excuse me.
So, Reverend, you make it a Friday church for us, a few of us guys. We play pool every Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we have a few hands here that agree that it was a good thing to do.
I heard the part of your story about taking a boat from, you lived in White Plains, but you took a boat to Long Island?
Yeah.
I was wondering about, where was the boat leaving from?
Mamaroneck. The first day I decided to go, I wanted to make sure I had my tie on, my suit, and my briefcase. And I was hoping people would see me going to the boatyard. And I parked the car, nobody. The usual guy that's there was there. He said, "Where are you going?" All dressed up. I said, "I'm going to work." He says, "Where is work?" I said, "Great Neck." He says, "You know how to get there?" I said, "Have you done it before?" I said, "No, but I think I go to Execution Rock, and then I make a 90-degree turn, and I'll hit Great Neck," which luckily it worked. So I had my custodian meet me at the dock in Great Neck, and it was a fun way. And on a bad day, instead of going straight to Mamaroneck, I'd go to Port Washington to, there's a Louis. This was a Jewish family who was a friend of a lot of us in terms of food and boating. And I'd go over there and have a little schnapps and have a little food to drink and go home from there.
This time with you, Ted, has just made me so happy. So thank you so much. And so that inspires the question I have. What would be one of the happiest times or moments in your life?
When I wake up early, I haven't learned how to sleep later than 7 or whatever. When I wake up, the first thing I look at is Claire. And she is so beautiful. And she's got that smile on her face. And I know everything is going to be all right.
thanks, Ted. It was beautiful. Do you have any advice for us on how to live well?
Pay attention to the hunches you get along the way. And growing up where money was short, money was a factor on what your choices were. But luckily, I was able to skid around that before. Because I'd work in the bowling alley, sitting on one of those separators, and those pins would fly. And if the guys were drunk enough and won, they put dollar bills in the hole of those balls as a tip, which made me feel very good. But I made 7 cents a line for being pin boy. That's what it was like.
So Ted, clearly you have inspired all of us just hearing about your story. Who are your heroes? Who inspired you throughout your life?
The guy I was named after, Tadeusz Kościuszko, was I think he was the one that did the plans on the Hudson. Why can't I think of the name of it? The Military Academy. West Point. And his statue is there, and we would go for events there. And when he left America, he left all of his all that he earned to the slaves that were freed, and he took none of it back with him. He just was that free. By the way, in Poland, the name for a African person is Murzyn, or Moor, which I thought, why didn't we think of that? Instead of saying, yes.
Ted, I have one question for you. Meredith mentioned before that you were the board chair years ago. Actually, I looked it up. You were board chair twice. My question to you is, what did you like best about being the board chair, and what was the thing that you liked least about being the board chair?
The treasury. We had so much to do and so many good ideas, we didn't always have to do it. But no, it's hard for me to question that, because I love most of it. I love being able to do something for somebody, and if I had the know-how and so on. And by the way, I was at the same time taking care of Polish immigrants who came on working visas in what's the town up north of us? Anyway, they were living north of here, and they were very good mechanics, very good fix-it-upper people, and I had a van, so I used them, and I found work for them, and they did a lot of work around this building for not too much money, and it was their favor to me to take very little, and so we used them a lot, plumbing, electricity, all the way down the line. And we still have a connection there.
They didn't work on the furnace, did they?
Good. If you had coal and wood.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. If you would say
Thank you so much, Ted. And we are concluding the formal part of our program. Ted will be around for a little while if you want to come up and share with him some more. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you.
I want to thank Meredith for spending 6 hours with me listening to my story. It felt so good. In fact,
for both of us.
I haven't hugged him today yet, and I think I'll do it now.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that was